There we go. Okay, so I'm gonna go over how to wash your mug. Out of the way. Up. If you have a sponge or a nail scrubber, that's going to be really helpful. You want to get rid of, you want to wash off all the loose pieces that might just be hanging off, those little dingleberries, especially on the inside, because you want this usable, right? You need to wash the handle and everything. And you want to also make sure your hands are not greasy. Like, don't eat lunch and then do this, right? I mean, hopefully y'all can just do this now after I'm done instructing you how to do it. And then it's the same thing for my advance is the same that we've always done. Right? Run under the water. And you just, it's not just this. That's not enough. So it's not enough just to run it underneath the water. You have to really reach in there, use a sponge if you have a clean sponge. Where is that? Really want to make sure there's no chunkies on the inside or under the handle or anything. And then we're going to set it to dry. It needs 24 hours to dry. So that means once you wash it, you have to wait 24 hours. Now, of course, I don't see you until next class, which is more than 24 hours. So it will have plenty of time to dry. And the reason why it has to dry is because it is so full of water right now that when you go to glaze it, the glaze will not get absorbed into the ceramic. So the glaze is going to just sit on the surface if you just start glazing right away. And the problem with that is when it goes and gets fired, it will either just melt right off, which is going to mess up my shelf and destroy your mug, or it'll pop off later. So again, I'm just going to repeat this. You have to wait 24 hours for this to dry because it needs to be able to absorb the water from the glaze, so it pulls the glaze into the pores. Otherwise, it's just going to sit on the surface and probably just melt right off. And the same thing on the inside, it'll go all the way to the bottom. It'll pull to the bottom, and then this is not useful to you at all. So now I have to let this sit. I don't have to wrap it up or something like that, okay? I'm just going to let it sit there. All right, I'm going to go over glazing. Okay. So you have you're going to make your glaze plan, and you might be getting something that looks like this through Google Classroom. Okay. If you choose the recipe that's really just one glaze color. If you choose one that has multiple glaze colors, the sheet's going to look different, but it's going to look something like this. It's a little guide. So you'll put the name of the color, you'll put the code, which you'll know what that is. And then you'll put the required layers, which for most of them is a 3. There may be something else underneath that says something about like, what is the recipe? Because sometimes there's something specific about the glazes, like you have to brush it horizontally or vertically. Like there's certain rules to make the glazes turn out better. Okay, these are meant to be slopped on. The Potter's Choice glazes are not meant to be applied super neatly, okay, which is a great thing about them. But there is some rules. First layer must stop a 1/2 inch above the ground, okay, wherever it touches the tabletop. It needs to be at least a ½ inch. And then, and that's basically a pinky. So if you take your pinky and you make a mark, where that is, that's where you're going to stop. And this is because some of the glazes are a little drippy. We would never go all the way to the bottom. And if you look at, you guys didn't do this, at least some of you didn't do this, but a lot of my cups that I make on the pottery wheel, I put a little, kind of a little indentation about a ½ inch. And that's where the glaze, it causes the drips to stop there for the most part. Sometimes they do go all the way down to the ground. And if they do, if they go onto the shelf, well, that means I have to use a hammer to knock it off the shelf. And it's messed up my shelf. So stops here for the first layer, and then the second layer stops about a ½ inch above that, and then the third layer stops a ½ inch of that. And if there is a fourth layer, which I don't think there is for any of the colors, it would stop ½ inch from that because of drips, I know this seems like a lot of space to not have any glaze, but it's really just to be protective. And it does mean that you can't put glaze here either on to the handle. I'm sorry, that's just the deal. We have to keep our shelves from just getting destroyed by the glaze. Okay, so that's what you need to know. And then I am going to, let's see, this is what I was talking about. So you get your glaze. It's going to be in one of these cups, and it's going to be a lot more than what you got before because you have to fill the inside of your, do the inside of your cup and the outside, but not the bottom. So you need to stir your glaze very well every time you glaze, every time, not just the first time and then you put it away and then you work with it the next day. You really need to stir it, and not just slightly. What happens is with this type of glaze, it has all these minerals in it. And you do want to be careful. You don't want to digest this. So keep it away from little siblings, animals. Wouldn't say it's poisonous or anything like that, but it's definitely not something when your little cousin to decide to try to drink, right? That's your responsibility to keep everybody safe in your household from your homework, basically. All right, so you can see the swirls too when you're stirring around. You'll see little swirls. You're never going to get rid of them all, but you'll see it start to blend in pretty well. The consistency of your glaze may be runny, it may be super thick. It just depends on the glaze color. Some of them, it's like glazing with whipped cream. Some of them, it's like glazing with just like, I don't know what this would be, cream, maybe? Okay. All right. I always start in the inside of my mug when I glaze. It's just easier that way. So I'm going to tilt it so you can see it a little better. But I start at the bottom and I just work my way up. See, I'm not trying to be super neat. Well, you probably can't even tell. But my brush strokes, I'm just having them go in whatever direction because there were no rules about this particular glaze. And this is going to be a bright red brown, even though it looks kind of purplish in the container. Potter's Choice glazes are tricky that way. They trick you. You open up one and you think it's red, but it's actually blue. I'm climbing up. This isn't taking me hardly any time at all. I'm just making sure there's a lot of glaze on my brush. I'm not really worried about it being on the metal. It can even drip inside. I don't want any of the raw clay showing through because that means it'll leak. We don't want it to leak. You can have brush strokes, that's all right. You can overlap your brush strokes, that's okay too. You just don't want to spend forever in one spot because that means you're just going to go down to, you're just going to basically pick up the glaze you just put down. That's what I'm trying to say. All right. So that looks pretty good. It's going to dry. It's already starting to dry. You can kind of see, wait, it's hard. I go one direction and it shows it in a different direction on the screen. So you can see it's starting to dry right there really quickly because this is dried. I washed this off last class or yesterday, 24 hours ago. It has a little moisture still in it, but it's almost completely dry. And now it's going to suck in that water, pull the glaze into those pores. You might see little bubbles in there, little air bubbles. Don't worry about them. It's not even a big deal. All right. I got to also be careful about holding it too much because remember fingerprints, right? So if I really want to be careful with that, I could, like, you can't see it, but I'm using like my jacket to hold it in place. If you get this glaze on your clothes, it may stain. So just be aware. Don't be too messy with it if you care about the surface of your, if you're doing this on your bedspread, which I hope you're not, definitely will end up dripping on your bedspread. I just dripped right there. Okay. So now I'm going to do the outside. Okay. And you can see how I'm really, it's called floating, but I'm floating the glaze on top. I have so much glaze on my brush that it is just floating on the surface. Stir it up a little bit. You constantly have to keep stirring these glazes because they will, all the good stuff goes to the bottom and you don't pick it up. Now the glaze you get in your container should be the right amount for your mug. If for some reason you end up with less than what you need to let me know. But at this point in the year, I'm running low on those little plastic cups. And also this takes a lot of glaze to cover these mugs. So hopefully we don't run out of your color. Okay, so I'm purposely going too low, and because I'm going to show you how to clean it up, because that's probably going to happen anyway. So with this first layer, it's easy to forget. So by purpose, I mean I forgot, because normally I would go to this line, but some of these glazes are so drippy, I just don't want to chance it. So I'm having you bring the line up a little bit higher than I probably would normally do. Okay, you want to get underneath the handle too. This makes it a little complicated to hold it, but get under the handle. Don't forget that because you do want to protect the handle. And glaze is a protective layer. It will help keep your cup safe, the ceramic material safe. Planters that aren't glazed tend to not last very long. So planters like those red clay planters that don't have any kind of coating on them tend to break and crack pretty quickly. So, all right. Hope you can't see that. Sorry about that. Do not label the bottom of your mug with this glaze. Do not do that. That will totally ruin it. well, to make it stick to the bottom of the shelf. I just won't fire it if I see that. I just won't fire it. I'll just give it back to you with all the glaze on it. Okay, so this is going to dry for a little while. When it's dry, I'm going to take it over to the sink and wipe off that excess. I'm trying to pick it up so I can show you. It's still just it's too wet to do that. But there is, wait, okay, here we go. It's starting to dry. I went way too far. Way too far. So I need to take a sponge and wipe that off. So, but I want to wait till it's dry so that I don't have to deal with these little spots. And if I pick it up with my finger, then I'm going to have to reapply. I'm seeing a couple spots that I missed, so I want to fix that. Oop, there's one right, you probably can't see it, but it's right here. Just looking around. On this first layer, you can see where you missed, but on the second and third layers, it's really hard to tell. All right, I'm gonna let that dry. And I put my stuff away. I'm gonna go clean my brush. And I will finish recording this once this is dry. Okay, so before I start my next layer, I need to clean up this part that I accidentally added glaze. You can't even see it. Too low. This is not going to work. I will not fire your mugs if you have the glaze down this low, and I'm not going to wipe it off for you. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the sponge. Yours looks like a little different, but I wet it. It's just a damp sponge, and then I'm just going to clean this stuff off. Please be careful about rinsing your sponges off in the sink, at least in the, yeah, pretty much any sink is probably not okay. But it has clay in it. It also has chemicals and stuff in it. So, yeah, we want to pollute more than we have to, I guess. And so I'm just pulling the glaze off this little bottom ½ inch. And that's just in case if anything drips, it will catch it before it goes to the bottom of the mug. And is there a way to make it super neat? Yeah, I mean, you can pull out some Q-tips and get all fancy pants with it if you want to. You know, like this area right here did not, it's a little high. I might want to add a little glaze there. But this is my first layer. So it's now ready for my second layer. So I've got my glaze and check my time. Okay, all right. I got my glaze here. I have let it sit for a while, so now I need to stir it up again with my brush, which is, where is my brush? Oh, I'm gonna pause this for a second. All right, found it. Okay, so I need to stir this up really well. Please make sure you don't have a bunch of water in your brush too, because the water will dilute the glaze. Okay. Now I should be keeping track of my layers. I can just use little marks to say I got 1 layer done, 2 layers done, 3 layers. So, all right, so I'm going to start on the inside again. This time I'm going to try to go in a different direction before I have the marks going straight up and down. I'm going to go side to side. You really do want a variety so that you get better coverage. And I'm floating it again. This is going to feel really excessive. compared to the other glazes, but you do want this glaze heavy so that it doesn't turn yucky brown. No one likes it. Like every year, there's always a few that end up being a brown color when it's supposed to be blue or red or something else or even green. And it's always because the student didn't float the glaze or change the direction or put enough layers on it. Okay, so look at that. That was fast. It's actually pretty quick to glaze these. They make glazes that you can dip your pottery into. And of this brand, apparently the glaze is not that good. Like it's better to brush it on. It just looks way cooler because this will look really pretty. All right, so that part's done on the inside and then we got to do the outside again. But this time, I want to stop it a quarter of an inch above that. So I'm just going to go ahead and put that layer there. Ooh, like that. Doesn't have to be perfect. Don't worry. It's going to take a few mugs to really get, like you'd have to make a few of these and glaze a few in order to get exactly what you want to get the practice. So just try it and see how it goes. We're not going to know until it gets fired anyway. So there we go. All right. See where I stopped? That's a little closer than I probably want to. And then, you know, just try to go in a different direction on the outside. If your brush seems like it's getting dry and there's like, you're getting this texture, where is it right there, that texture before it goes away, that means you don't have enough glaze on your brush. So please add it. Okay, so we're gonna let this dry now. Still have some left. All right, so my third layer is almost dry, but not quite. You have to wait for it to completely dry. These little dark spots that are showing up means it's not completely dry. You do not want to rush this glaze. So, so this may be something you end up taking several days to do, right? And if you notice, I left my brush, I shouldn't have left it. It's already getting crusty with glaze. I'm gonna have to go clean it. But this still needs just a few more minutes probably. I mean, because by the time you get to that, you know, the second layer, it's already got a lot of water in there still. And then when I go to do the third layer, if this is not dried out more, it might reject that third layer. So we just wait for everything to dry and then we glaze it with that third layer. All right, so what the mug is pretty dry. There might be a couple spots. Some things you might notice when the glaze dries. I don't see if it focuses. Might see those little like bubbles. Don't worry about those. Those are okay. It just means there was a little, there was a pretty large pore in there, and then the glaze, it's just like a little air bubble that kind of came up through the glaze right when it was drying. But it's okay. It'll flatten out. So you don't have to worry about it. And then all these little swirls you see, all these little brush strokes, not even a problem. Okay. So, oh, and you can kind of see where this is my second layer, and you can see my first layer there. And so my next one, I'm going to stop here, and it might even help. It's totally okay if you take a pencil, make sure it's right. And if you want to go ahead and draw the line, you can draw on glaze and it doesn't stay. The graphite burns out in the kiln, so you'll never see it. And then just, boop. Yeah, somewhere like that. Okay. All right. So I'm going to take my glaze, same situation. Oh, grab my brush. So I clean my brush, but it's filled with water. So let me show you. Let's see, like, so I got a paper towel. I'm just going to try to pull some of that water out of there. I don't need to water down my glaze. Okay. When I glaze, I like to work on a piece of paper, so you do not have to clean up that much. And then maybe you can see like the little swirlies, but it's definitely separating. So I need to stir, 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 stir. And just like before, this is my third layer. So this is my last layer. I'm going to want to go in a different direction. So I went kind of across before. So now I'm going to take it back up. So floating it, and if you can kind of see that, the shadow's pretty bad, but just floating it. Please do not pour glaze on the inside. It might be tempting, but it does not really work very well for this glaze. Because the goal is that you can actually use this mug. So it's happening real fast. Like I'm really loading up my brush with a lot of glaze and just letting it kind of float. I might flip my brush over. I'm not too concerned about it being thick, but if you pour it in there, that might be way too much, and it's not going to look right because this glaze is meant to be brushed on, and it's so fast. Once it's dry, like this is going to take me like a minute, maybe two. The handle's kind of a pain in the butt, but that's all right. Okay, so the inside is completely dry, or completely glazed, and it's starting to dry. And so I'm going to do what I did last time. I'm going to just go ahead and put that layer right at the bottom so you can see it. See? I'm going to turn it around. If you get any weird drips, please remove them. Like with a sponge, try to catch them at least. We do not want this to drip down to the bottom. So, right. All right, so that's basically ends up being about 3/4 of an inch and an inch off the bottom, that last layer. And now I'm gonna go ahead and do my handle first. I think it's gonna be easier. Now, if you end up with a lot of glaze left over, either you made a really small mug, or you didn't use enough layers. I'm just saying. Because the amount that I'm going to put into the containers should coordinate with the size of your mug. Get down to the, not completely to the bottom, but and I've said this before, but do not be tempted to use the other glazes with this glaze. If you run out, contact me and I will set you up with some more. But do not use the other glazes that we've used. They do not work well together because they fire at different temperatures. It's just gonna ruin your piece and then there's nothing we can do about it. All right, so now that was my last layer. I would be keeping track on my my glaze plan so that I would know if I only got one layer done, that I only got one layer done. I'm gonna go clean this brush. So I'm gonna take you over with me. Let's pause first. All right. Okay, so I got my bucket of water. You really don't want to put glaze down the sink, especially a sink in the kitchen. It's considered bad. I don't know if it gets in your brown water and all that. I don't know how good it is, but we kind of try to do like keep our exposure to glaze low because sometimes the chemicals we don't like, our skin doesn't like the chemicals. Like if you have a cut in your hand, you should probably wear gloves or something like that. But I'm just using the bottom of the bucket to kind of scrape my paintbrush against. And then if you have access to soap, you take it and you twirl it around in your hands. And this is the best way to clean brushes just all together, whether you're painting with acrylics or watercolors or glazes. You're just, and then the real test, towel test, or you can see like usually if there's any colors on there like that. Now it's ready to go. I kind of shake my brush up and I am done glazing. And then this does not get dumped down the sink. It gets dumped outside. So I'll do that in just a second.